School of Social Transformation. We're going to start off today with just a welcome from the Associate Director of the School of Social Transformation, Karen Kuo. Karen, can you come on up?
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm also in the Asian Pacific American Studies program, including being the Associate Director. Unfortunately, Camilla Fojas, who's our director, could not be here today, so I'm pleased today to speak on behalf of the School of Social Transformation to say a few words about our mission and to commence the Center for Work and Democracy's 2022 conference, Organizing and Protest in Political Crisis. The Center for Work and Democracy is one of 3 centers in the School of Social Transformation, including the Center for Gender Equity in Science and Technology and the Center for Indian Education, along with degree programs in Justice Studies, American Studies, Women and Gender Studies, African American Studies, Asian Pacific American Studies, and Social and Cultural Pedagogy. At SST, as an academic department at the university, our programs and our center's purpose and aspirations have always been to incorporate community-centered approaches to social transformation in our scholarship and teaching. Each of our programs have come out of a history of political agitation and advocacy for the betterment of marginalized communities and peoples, first and foremost, but with the goal of transforming our culture, our society, and our worlds. Our faculty and students understand that knowledge production must be implemented toward building coalitions that matter at the most fundamental level, to create non-hierarchical and non-hegemonic publics and societies. I'm focused today on the word crisis in this year's conference theme, Organizing and Protest in Political Crisis, not just because of the saliency of crisis only in these times, but in any time working towards a democratic and unexploitative society are always crises to be harnessed as opportunities to create and imagine different pathways and future communities, ways of being, feeling, and knowing. SST is appreciative of the opportunity to participate in, collaborate with, and support the work of the Center for Work and Democracy. It is a privileged day to be part of this conference. Thank you.
So just a few words about the Center for Work and Democracy. I'm not going to talk for a very long time, but the operating thesis of the center is that a lot of the reasons we're in a political crisis at the moment is due both to extreme, historically unprecedented levels of socioeconomic inequality and the marginalization of working people's voices in politics. Working people's organizations have either been outright destroyed through things like union busting, or they've withered away as civic associations collapse. And one of the goals of the center is to understand this problem and figure out ways to remedy it. So this conference in particular, we've purposely brought together academics who think about these issues a lot with activists and organizers to have a joint conversation about what we can do moving forward in this context of political crisis. So another assumption that we have is the world's in trouble. The country's in trouble. And it's not enough to simply do research. It's not enough to simply do activism in your own town. It's not enough to do these sorts of local things or these professionally mandated things that we're used to doing. We need to start thinking a little bit differently about what we can be doing. And here at the center, we really want to try and figure that out. So that's why all of you are here today, and welcome. I'm very glad to have you. Our first speaker today is Marcia Howard. Marcia Howard is the Vice President of the Minnesota Federation of Teachers. She was recently elected to that position, partially on the basis of her longstanding union activism and experience. Also, her experience as a teacher. She's been a teacher at Roosevelt High School now for 24 years, 24 years, where she is widely known to be one of the most effective and best teachers in the school and indeed in Minneapolis. When George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, 2020, Marcia's house was about 200 feet from the site. And so Marcia quite quickly got involved in the protest at George Floyd Square. As a way of introducing that context, although Marcia will not be exclusively talking about George Floyd Square today, we do want to show you a short video that we made about the George Floyd protest, which is slightly dated now. And I also want to note that this video was made in cooperation with community members in George Floyd Square. Most of it is using cell phone footage from participants in the protests, people who live there, people who live on the south side of Minneapolis. And I also want to introduce two of the people from the documentary filmmaking company, which put it together for us. So first, Leola Kalazai. Where is Leola? Leola's right here. And sitting next to her is Kylie Kraskowskis. They're both here from Flow State Films. So they've been good, very important collaborators for us and maybe for some of you going forward. We certainly are great admirers of their documentary work. So with all that in mind, why don't we first show the free state of George Floyd.
In Chicago. This is real.
space is a space of protest. The art is art of protest.
We have redefined what community safety looks like. And you know what we found? Community brings safety.
Community looks like.
No justice, no streets. No justice, no streets. No justice, no streets.
The Minneapolis hang-up and project right now. We're going to be hearing from Rashad tomorrow on one of the panels, and Cedric Johnson, who's here from University of Illinois, Chicago, and he is the author most recently of The Panthers Can't Save Us Now. So please welcome them all up here. We're going to start off with Marcia Howard.
Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for welcoming me here today. I just left George Floyd Square at midnight to get to the airport by 3 o'clock in the morning in order to be here. George Floyd Square is right now, I can just say that it is the longest running political occupied space in American history. All right, we've been there for 2 years and 3 months right now, since May 25th, 2020, since George Floyd was lynched about 263 steps from my front door. On that day, a former student of mine, Darnella, filmed the death of George Floyd. I had been teaching in the midst of COVID. It was a holiday day, but as hundreds and then thousands of people came to the intersection of 38 in Chicago, it became really clear that there was this shift. And that shift did not just occur at that intersection, it occurred in our city as Black Hawk helicopters were over our head and the smell of smoke was in the air because the city began to burn. The very next day, I went online, Snapchat. I had a dedicated teacher Snapchat, and I just basically said to the kids, you all got credit, you passed English, we're done for the year. We were reading The Color Purple, there's a film, and we were done for the year. Be safe and seek justice. Those were my last words. And from that moment on, I wanted to support my community and I wanted to support my people. In Minneapolis, the scourge of police brutality was something that I was aware of since I had moved to that state, since I had gone to that city and started teaching in 1998. But it really hit close to home on May 25th, 2020. As an educator, I knew that someone responsible had to be out there. And so I couldn't sleep. And when I couldn't sleep, I would be outside. So I've been outside ever since. I've been outside ever since. But people ask, how was the transition from being in a classroom to being in an occupation, from being in an autonomous zone? It wasn't that much different, because what I have learned being an educator, being in a union, was that organization is organization, organizing is organizing, strategizing is strategizing. And as we stood and decided that we were not moving, that's precisely what we had to do. At some point, our city came and said, we need y'all to leave. This has been enough. We didn't. We said, no. Why won't you leave? What are you staying there for? And the answer was for justice. And then they asked us a question. What does justice look like? That was the question that they asked us. And so we went up and down the streets, in and out of businesses. We asked the brothers on the corner. I asked my neighbors, the renters, the mortgage payers, what do you want? What do you need to thrive? And those answers became what we now call Justice Resolution 001. It was a list of demands, 24 of them, that we presented to the city, to the county, to the state, to the mayor, to the governor, to then President Trump. And funnily enough, they got cracking. Y'all remember 2020? You remember what the city was like, what the nation was like, what the world was like. All of a sudden, we felt the power of collective action, and they had to listen to us. They had to. And so that is precisely what has gone on. Now, we're in a particular conundrum. Do we verbalize, advertise, talk about the wins that we've made with the 24 demands, with the idea that if they don't scream, we don't holler? We just want the demands met. We've been in bargaining, in closed door sessions. I've had muckety mucks. Well, I'll just say it. The Attorney General meet me in secret behind my house to negotiate number 4 about Amy Klobuchar's railroading of a young man named Mayan Burrell into prison. The AP did an exhaustive research project showing that he may have been sort of, forced into prison for a crime that he didn't commit. Within months, he was released. Mind you, he had a life sentence, and he walked out of prison that December. Don't tell me collective action doesn't work. It works. You may ask, what was our leverage? You saw barricades. Those barricades lasted until June 3rd of 2021. And when the barricades fell, a lot of people looked to George Floyd Square and said, oh, you no longer have leverage. And that's because they weren't quite sure what our leverage was. It was never the barricades. Every single day, we meet in that square at a defunct speedway that we now call the People's Way. Every single morning at 8 in the morning, every single evening at 7 p.m. We meet, the community meets, and there we forge community. We look at each other. We do something different that I think in this nation we're going to have to start doing a little bit more. We're facing each other instead of just being on Facebook. We don't go on next door, we actually go next door. We see each other and connect with each other, and we talk about our grievances. We talk about what we want. We look at each other and realize that we have to fight for each other. When we talk about labor, when we talk about, oh, there is no war but class war, come on, y'all. Not if we live in a place that has not divested itself from white supremacy. You cannot. I used to be an HVAC engineer. I will not be on an assembly line with someone and we say there is no war but class war and I'm still a nigga. That ain't gonna work. We need to be honest about what we have to do as laborers, as workers in this nation. And that's going to involve actually seeing each other, looking at each other, organizing and strategizing, going off and having these conversations with each other about the ways in which we can go forward, because we have to buoy each other up. People ask, how can you be out there in the hood, 3 a.m? What they expected was the way in which they break up any type of union. They start doing divisive language. They start wedging in and separating you, the old from the young, those of us that are bougie and middle class from the denizens of the street, the white folks from the black folks, the ardent militant leftists from the liberals. They try to separate you. They use language, they use rhetoric, they use these gatekeeping sort of terminology in order to say you're not really cohesive. Look at here. If we in a boat, row, we gonna get to the other side. We can argue while we rowing. Row, put your back into it. You can argue. That does not mean you ignore toxicity. That does not mean that you ignore philosophical differences. But if the whole idea is that we don't go over this waterfall that is the United States of America and our failing democracy, you need to put your back into it. Talk while you're moving. Talk while you're moving. Because I'm telling you right now, the movement, the labor movement, all of it is going to be intersectional. So you need to start listening to people that you might not have listened to before. At 38th in Chicago, we listen to Black and Indigenous women first because we done tried it every other way. We've tried it every other way. So that's who we listen to first. And then we do this sort of ring circle. The more marginalized, they go first. And it's not an Olympics. It's not as if we're jockeying for identity. What we're doing is attempting to consider the person who has suffered under the yoke of this heteropatriarchy, all the isms. The person who suffered the most under it, they probably have a new and unique way of addressing these systems because they've had to survive the rest of us. That is what we do at 38 in Chicago. But a funny thing happened on the way to a revolution. I remembered I was a teacher. I came back to it last year, and my school and my district were excellent in the sense that they decided to allow me to have, first hour prep so that I could still do the morning meetings. And then at 1:30, I would run back to the square. I think the square took about 9 months for them to even figure out that I wasn't there 24/7 again. I took one full school year off, and then I went back last year. But while we were doing that, some rumblings happened in my district, in my union. We were starting to get ready to go on a strike. Now, let me tell you about MFT, Minneapolis Federation of Teachers. I'm in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is overwhelmingly a white state. I'm in an overwhelmingly white profession. It's racialized and it's gendered. So my colleagues are mostly white women academics, right? But after we marched in the streets, there was a sea change in the way in which people moved in Minneapolis. People who would have never stood up for themselves had practiced standing up for Black lives. They marched down Lake Street University. They marched on 35W and almost got hit by a semi-tractor trailer truck. And because they had that practice, little Miss Becky from Anoka, Jeff from Jiffy Lube, they started getting the practice of standing up for themselves and risking their own mortal life for an ideal. And because they had that practice, they realized they could do it for themselves. They could do it for their profession. They could do it for their colleagues. They could do it for their calling. And that's what they started to do. I'm telling you, the district in Minneapolis did not expect us to go on strike. They did not think we were that organized. They did not think that we were that prepared. They didn't think we were brave enough to do it. But again, these people had just spent the last 2 years watching the whole world stand up for us in Minneapolis. And we stood up for ourselves in Minneapolis. So the least we could do is stand up for our students and families for what they needed, which was safe and stable schools. The least that they could do was stand up for smaller class sizes. The least that they could do is stand up for the educational support personnel that was given poverty wages year after year after year. No war but class war. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about why we had front of the house, back of the house politics, even in public education, where our support personnel have been given poverty wages, $24,000 a year. $24,000 a year for a person who was coming to work when I came to work, left when I left, and then had to go and get a second job or a third job. And those people were overwhelmingly like me, Black and brown and indigenous folk. And we had to have a conversation. I said, well, you got to talk. I had to talk to my colleagues. Now, at that time, I was year 23. I'm good. I was good. I'm not as good as the people across the river because they paid them more, but I was personally good. But how could I go to work every day knowing that someone who co-labors beside me was getting less money? Let me tell you, for an ESP to sit in a push-in class of mine next to a student who needed assistance, and they made less money than that same student who would leave and go work at Target. Why? That wasn't right. It was not right. How can a 17-year-old make more than a professional educational support personnel? I'll tell you why. Psychological wage. In order to make Becky from Anoka or Marcia from Minneapolis feel good about the fact that I wasn't making as much money as the teachers in the suburb, they had to give me somebody that was, relative to me, paid poverty wages, that relative deprivation. They paid her that money to make me feel good about my little bit of money. And you got to be honest about that. They have all these people getting less money so that we can sit beside them and feel aggrandized in comparison. And then somehow think we earned it. Oh yeah, we were born on second base and think we hit a double. When in fact they were deliberately squashing their income in order to make us feel okay about what we were getting. So we brought that all in the open. We said, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. If we're going to march, we're going to be marching for them first. And that was, it was a psychological thing where you had to say, mind you, we're two different chapters of a union. They bargain, we bargain separately. But I said personally, there was no way I was going back to work the next year if they were not getting at least, and this is what we were asking for. They were asking for $35,000 a year. That's what they were asking for. At least $35,000 a year. And never before had we had such cohesiveness between chapters, the teacher chapter and the educational support chapter. Until now, because we got into the habit of standing up for each other. We got into the habit of making everybody's business our business. And so that is what we did. Never let them say collective action doesn't work. The gains that we made while we were in, it was the first strike in 51 years in Minneapolis for teachers. The first teacher strike in Minneapolis in 51 years. And then they thought, oh, it's gonna be too cold. It was 5 degrees. We still were out there. Then it rained. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be too wet. And we were still out there. We were out there for 3 weeks. And I had to talk to them. Again, going from this strike and then leave the strike line and still occupy George Floyd Square. Mind you, we're still in GFS. Matter of fact, multiple schools marched into GFS while on strike because it's this notion that we are going to stand for something that has to do with the betterment of everybody's lives. My line is about Black lives. When I say Black Lives Matter, I'm not part of an organization. When I say Black Lives Matter, I mean Black Lives Matter. That's it. I mean Black Lives Matter, which is why I was willing to go on strike, because Black Lives Matter. because people of color in Minneapolis have gotten a raw deal for many, many years. It's all connected. And this is something that if I don't share anything, I'm sleep deprived and I'm over caffeinated. But if I don't share anything, I'm gonna share this part with y'all. Marcia, how do you go from first vice president of MFT to being a leader? I don't run nothing but my mouth, but a leader at George Floyd Square or teaching or whatever it is, because it's all connected. This is supposed to be hot labor summer. And I'm telling you right now, you are still in the fight for Black lives. You're still in the fight for your lives. And you need to take ownership of that. We are doing nothing less in education than saving democracy. This is not hyperbole. When you see that there are, and I need to be circumspect because I have to go out into a square where my life is at risk every single day. But I've said this privately and I'm gonna say it publicly. What's going to get me killed is what I'm doing for labor. Because now I'm fucking with their money. Do you understand? Do you understand we were not supposed to go on strike? Do you understand that the for-profit, nonprofit entities that want to take over public schools, that want to make it about getting public monies going to private institutions, and they can couch it under choice, they can couch it under vouchers, they can couch it under charter, they can couch it under everything, but what they want is taxpayer money that they know is coming, but going in their pocket. And now we fucking with their money, all right? And this is how we gonna do it. Stand your ground for public education. I don't care if they put it under reform or equity or whatever, it needs to be free public education. That's number one. It needs to be free public education. Stand your ground for that. But number two, you're going to have to get from behind a desk, get from behind a computer, and actually start talking to people in order to organize folks. Because if you notice in Minneapolis, because they got a little taste of organization, Minneapolis is a union town. We doing it. I mean, like left and right, Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, and we're all talking to each other. Surreptitiously, a little quiet in the back rooms. Hey girl, what you doing? You know we about to go a little straight. I'm gonna tell you this, don't get sick. Don't get, oh yeah, Minnesota nurses just voted to strike. They got a 10-day cooling off period, but we'll be there, solidarity. Starbucks, another store, just voted to unionize, and we'll be there, solidarity. Trader Joe's, they said, thank y'all for coming in during the strike. You gave us an idea, solidarity. And one after one after one. But I need to talk to y'all about how they're gonna push back on those efforts. At 38th and Chicago, we talk about the 5 C's of the 4 corners. Y'all know the 4 corners. We got 4 different neighborhoods. We got Bancroft, my neighborhood, Bryant, Powderhorn, and Central. And I say there are 5 C's of those 4 corners. And those are the controlling factors. One of them is a particular store on a corner. So I'm gonna say commerce. The other one is community orgs. The other one are the crooks in the alley and cops. The 5th one is commercial media. The 5 C's of the 4 corners form their own fist. They all in it together. When you hear about Marcia went to UTLA and I say, don't show that I'm here. They need to think I'm still in the square. Can you hold off for 12 hours? And they didn't. It's not their, none of this is their fault, but I'm like, this is serious. And someone gets murdered and it's not being investigated. And then you wonder how that happens when we are literally in the most surveilled four corners in America right now, right? So the cops and the crooks and organizations that are all trying to get that city money, that philanthropic money, they're all in on it. It's all about development and capitalism and the ways in which everything trickles down. I could be a little bit more descriptive, but I won't. I have to be coy in this moment because I got to go back, right? But I'm telling you right now, the challenges that you'll have to face as union members or organizers or thinking about the implications for the nation is this. We don't necessarily got Pinkertons beating our ass while we out there, but it is still life and death. They are willing to shed blood for this. They're willing to ruin lives for this. They're willing to undermine, infiltrate, and ruin the efforts that you're making in order to organize people. So if you want to feel less of an academic and more of a Billy Badass, that's where we are right now. When you think about the encroachments right now on all the freedoms, all the progress, everything that we have gained, it's because they know it's moment time. And the pendulum has swung back. They realize what was about to be out of their grasp, and they've clawed that back. So now's the time to fight. And you have to fight rhetorically, you have to fight intellectually, you have to fight strategically, and you gotta fight bare knuckle brawl. I mean that metaphorically, but I mean it. It is a fight for our very nation. Now, we have probably gone the gamut between ready to stand our ground and ready to buy a ticket to Canada. Everybody has, come on now. You know you have, right? But I'm gonna tell you this, my family has been here a collective 243 years on record that I know of. We've shed blood on this stolen land. Our lives have been stolen and manipulated. I am the very first person in all my generations of family. I'm the first generation of people who could vote. My mother went to segregated schools until she was 15 years old. I ain't going nowhere. So the fight that we have to fight in order to make this the nation that we want it to be, in order to somehow, and it might not be the nation that it is right now. It might not be what it looked like right now, because it ain't working out too well, is it? It's not. But that means we have to ideate what we want it to look like. We have to fight for it. We have to organize for it. We need to put our back into it and row. We have to. One thing that I think about when I try to connect being in the union and being an educator and being a militant leftist, I had the president of city council call me last year and said, Marcia, they're calling you a domestic terrorist, Marcia. I love her to death, but I said, a domestic terrorist, why? Marcia, you put a skating rink, an ice skating rink, in the middle of the street, Marcia. So they're calling me a domestic terrorist because we put an ice skating rink in the middle of the street. Yes. All right. Unfortunately, she told me that January 5th, 2021. January 6th, we were on a Zoom call. I said, you were saying they ain't never called me a domestic terrorist again, so I can fly freely, all right? Yeah, we say no justice, no street, and we do put roadblocks up. We coyly, obstruct traffic, but on June 3rd, last year, they opened up the streets. There are fists that mark every intersection. So there are 5 fists now in the free state of George Floyd. And we still move in the way that we did. We meet every day, we feed each other, we hold each other in community. And I'm gonna tell you, beyond the barricade, that's been the most revolutionary thing. That's the radical thing. That's what they want to undermine. This idea of us sitting together and talking and problem solving and making moves. That's the issue. And so when you see those type of incursions in your institutions, in your centers, in your schools, where someone is trying to wedge y'all apart, I need you to fight against that, because it's going to take more talking to each other. It's going to take that type of forging connections with people that maybe you wouldn't have been messing with, but you're going to have to. You're going to have to. Because the powers that be right now, and again, I need to be coy, the power, they want it all. They want it all. They want it all. They want it all. And I think what we're seeing right now, there's this feeling that people have felt probably within the last 5 years that they may not be able to put a name to, but they feel it. Something's weird. Something's wrong. And they don't want to say, oh, I'm disappointed in what I was promised versus what I have. They don't want to say, what happened to the American dream? They don't want to say, is there enough left for me? But they have to say it, because we all feel it. We all feel that something has slipped away, in fact, was taken away from us. And the only way that we're going to get what we collectively need is to stand together and fight for it. We all got to get to the other side. Let me talk to you. I say put your back into it. That does not mean sit there and watch somebody with a drill drilling in the boat so that y'all all sink. Because if you notice, there are other people who have an escape plan. So they don't care if we sink. They don't care if we sink. They don't. Because they got other plans. But if we're all going to make it to the other side, we're going to all have to work together. And this sounds like platitudes when a lot of what I'm talking about involves a little bit more daring do than I'm actually revealing right now. It's going to involve work. It's going to involve strategy. It's going to involve you divesting yourself of preconceived notions of who is a leader and who's not. You have to start listening to the least of us. Because if you don't, all you're going to do is replicate the systems that got us in this problem in the first place. At 38th in Chicago, we say, kill the cop in your head. But I want to say, kill the op in your head. Kill the op in your head. Because those of us who would be perfectly okay to live our upper middle class dreams at the expense of everybody else, you need to admit that. Because you're going to have to work against that. Because it's all of us or it's going to be none of us. Trust and believe. It's all of us or it's going to be none of us. All of us or none of us. So we all need to come. And not everybody's ready. We're at 38th in Chicago. Sometimes you got to go to 45th. Sometimes you got to go all the way to 62 and walk somebody up. And if they're not where they need to be, if you value them, stay with them and bring them along. Just talk with them and walk with them and bring them to where they need to be. Because the movement that is coming, they say there's a fire next time. It's going to be a flood. It's all of us or nothing. So start rowing. Put your back into it. Let's go. No justice, no streets. No justice, no streets. No justice, no streets. And we mean that.
So Rashad Shabazz, my colleague in the School of Social Transformation, is going to give a quick response to Marcia, and then Cedric will, and then we'll have a conversation with everybody.
All right, good morning, everybody. That's hard to follow. So, Black people are working people, and work has been tied to Black life through the slave trade, plantation slavery, and many other forms of labor exploitation. The labor movement and Black liberation the labor movement and Black liberation are tied together in very much the same way that Marcia's eloquent, passionate, and powerful words just demonstrated. And I'd like to actually provide a little bit of context to some of the things that Marcia was saying, especially because Marcia is a teacher. In 1946, the mayor of Minneapolis and his civil rights team did a study on labor exploitation and racism in the city of Minneapolis. This exhaustive first-time study looked at the various forms of labor exploitation that Black workers face in the city. They looked at how small independent stores and shops discriminated against Black employees by not hiring them out of the fear that white patrons wouldn't shop there. They looked at large industrial labor organizations like Honeywell. I know y'all know who Honeywell is. They looked at large industrial organizations like Honeywell and tried to understand why they refused to hire Black employees. They also looked at the teachers' union, which had put up a total blockade of teachers, of Black teachers, in 1946. And they also looked at union organizations. What they discovered was that there was systematic and institutional discrimination against Black laborers in the city. And as a result of this, Black Minneapolis, Black Minneapolis were forced to work in service sector jobs as porters, domestic technicians, and car washes. Now, I know some of y'all know who I am, and y'all know that I've been working on this project for a few years, so you know there's got to be Prince references. Prince's maternal grandfather worked as a car washer after migrating with his wife to the city in 1919 as they were escaping terrorism in their small Louisiana town. This resulted in them raising their twin daughters in one of the city's first housing projects. One of those twin daughters, Maddie Shaw, the mother of Prince. Prince's father, John L. Nelson, who migrated from a small Louisiana town in the late 1920s with his mother and sister, worked as a doorman for a downtown hotel that refused to admit Black patrons. While on his long shifts, he stole away time and taught himself to play piano on the Steinway that sat in the lobby. The report made the following recommendations: that the city would press labor unions and war contractors. This is 1946. It would press labor unions and war contractors to open their doors to Black laborers, especially war contractors, because of federal laws that attempted to undermine discrimination. This resulted in numerous Black teachers moving into the Minneapolis Teachers Union in 1947, 48, 49, 50, and 51. And it also opened up a spot for a budding musician who had just met and fallen in love with a beautiful singer on some of the South Side's clubs named John L. Nelson to become the first Black person to work at Honeywell. He used those Honeywell wages to do something few Black people at this time could do. 1 in 20 Black people in Minneapolis in the 50s owned a home. He used those Honeywell wages to purchase a home on the city's north side. John and Maddie's son attended Lincoln Junior High, Lincoln Junior High in the late 1960s. During 1969, the teachers union went on strike. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
11-year-old Prince.
There's a news camera, kind of like this one. As teachers are in the background, holding picket signs, demanding for fair wages, and also demanding to change the name of the school from Lincoln to Malcolm X Elementary. And also demanding what they called then an Afrocentric curriculum that centered Black life, Black history, Black art. As the camera pans, a small, doe-eyed, fair-skinned boy is bouncing up in the background, trying to get his face into the camera. The reporter pivots, turns to the enthusiastic little boy, who under every other circumstance was painfully shy. Painfully shy. He turns to the little boy, he bends down to the 4-foot child, and he says, "Do you support the teachers striking?" The little boy, without hesitation, looks up at the camera and says, "Yes, because they be teaching us and stuff. And they need some more money. They be teaching us and stuff, and they need some more money." What this story really illustrates is precisely what Marcia was talking about. The recognition that there is this connection between labor and Black liberation opened a space for the Nelson family to purchase a home, raise a child, and provide him with both the insight and thoughtfulness to recognize that the people that he was around every day, the ones who taught him music, which was the language he spoke the most, that they needed to be treated well, that they needed better wages. 11 years old. They be teaching us and stuff, and they need more money. You know, Prince always knew that the revolution was going to happen in Minneapolis. He always knew that, not only just because he named his band that, but because he understood that there was something there, something unique, powerful. And having grown up on both sides of the city, the South Side and the North Side, he recognized that there was something that provided the Black community with both a source of power, pride, and obstacles that they had to face. And as an 11-year-old kid, he understood that one of those obstacles was ensuring that people were well paid, that they were taken care of, that their daily needs of feeding their children, clothing them, ensuring that they could pay for whatever extracurricular activities, purchase a home, live in a decent place were essential to the people on the North and the South Side, and that they should have it. And so, as we gather here today, I would really like for us to think about that 11-year-old boy whose insight and thoughtfulness allowed him to muster up the courage to speak on camera in spite of his painful shyness, to speak on camera to support the people that he cared about. And that he recognized that his neighborhood, segregated it was, grappling with painful unemployment, hemmed in through 2 expressways that were being built around him and that were effectively being abandoned by the city. He recognized that the kids in his neighborhood and the teachers who came there to teach him deserved dignity, that they deserved to be able to take care of their families, that they deserved to be able to feed their children and to house them, and also to provide them with beautiful music. Thank you.
All right, good morning. It's really great to be here. I want to thank Mike as well as Ben for organizing this, along with all the other people who've played a role in making this happen. Definitely want to thank Marcia and Rashad for their comments. I'm sitting over there trying to think, what the hell am I going to say that might be useful as a follow-up. Also, was feeling a bit nostalgic as somebody, and certainly I felt a sense of solidarity as somebody who actually grew up in a union household. My parents were a part of the Louisiana Colored Teachers Association, which existed even into the 1970s, right? Having that experience and also being a member of a union myself right now, it's really great to hear this kind of conversation. I want to offer 2 things. I'm going to offer a bit of a disclaimer and try to situate myself as a questioner, as a person who's going to respond here. And then I also want to offer some provocations, right? And these aren't directed at Marcia or Rashad or anybody else necessarily in this room, but they're more so questions that have nagged me as a person who's been wrestling with these issues of police violence for some time. And I'm sure many people here can identify, this didn't start with George Floyd, it didn't start with Rodney King, but we've been dealing with these issues for some time. I grew up in Louisiana during the 1970s and 80s. I came of age during the crack cocaine crisis of the 1980s. I graduated high school in 1989. I know I look like I'm 30 in my 30s, but don't be deceived, right? And even in that young age, right, having grown up in Louisiana in an activist Black church, at the age of 18, 19, I was already participating in things that would now be called anti-carceral activism, even though we didn't really use that language back then. As a freshman in college at Southern University in Baton Rouge, already participating in groups like the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. As an 18-year-old, right? Didn't even know some of the major actors and players that were involved at that time. As a 19-year-old, taking other kids, younger Black boys, to visit one of the prisons in Louisiana to talk to gang members. So a lot of that activity was already happening. I wasn't thinking about Black Lives Matter at that point. Nobody was. We weren't using that sort of language. We were more caught up in nostalgia for the 1960s. We were more enamored by Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, and we were listening to these things in the music of that particular time, you know, the golden age of hip hop music during the late 80s and early 90s. So that's the period that shaped me. And I'm saying that not to, you know, just be overly nostalgic, but to try to inform or situate the kinds of criticism I want to make in a few minutes. We've been saying these things for a long time, you know, in terms of thinking about these problems as discretely racial phenomenon. And I want to push back against some of the broader claims that circulate now and that are almost commonsensical in many corners of the left. I also want to ask them questions that I hope we can consider, you know, for the remainder of our time here, as it relates to the George Floyd protest. The first thing is I want to talk a little bit about what's happened since, and I want you all to think about what's actually happened in terms of progress since the 2020 George Floyd protest. There were many people who, you know, many of my friends, some people who are not my friends, who were jubilant about the protests, right? They watched, you know, millions of people turn out in every zip code in the country to express their you know, their opposition to police violence, to show their solidarity for George Floyd and his family, to call for immediate police reform, to call for more in the way of anti-racist remedies. And what I want us to think about is how much materialized, right? How much of the things that we wanted, the things that we talked about, the things that we imagined during that period have actually materialized, and why or why not haven't we seen some of the changes that we desire? I don't want to give the impression that nothing's happened, right? I got a lot of students who sort of stay stuck in that particular space. We've seen a tremendous amount of legislation since the murder of George Floyd, right? We've seen some police jurisdictions move towards revising use of force policy. We've seen some smaller jurisdictions engage in practices like purchasing, you know, body cameras and having mandatory body cameras for their officers. We've also seen some larger metropolitan regions talk about demilitarizing police, moving away from the use of police to address mental health emergencies, and developing nonviolent approaches or strategies to public safety. So we've seen some significant changes. I don't ever want to, you know, diminish the fact that things have happened, right? We've seen some changes. But some of the things that people were calling for, defunding police departments, dismantling or abolishing police departments, have not happened. And I think, you know, we really have to think seriously about why it has not happened. Why haven't we seen this, even in places like Minneapolis, and you all can fill me in, where during the summer of 2020, there was some discussion about having a veto-proof city council majority that would ensure this movement towards defunding and dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. So we have to ask these tough questions of ourselves in this moment, especially as the years have rolled by now. So why has progress not materialized in the ways that so many have hoped for? I also want us to ask this question as well. Why do we treat the problem of police violence as an exceptional condition afflicting the Black population, when it is not exceptional and it is not a problem that is universally felt by the Black population as such, right? What do I mean by that? If we abolished or ended police violence against Black civilians tomorrow, if we ended it tomorrow, the US would still outpace all other comparably wealthy nations in terms of violence against civilians. If we stopped it tomorrow, we would still lead the world in terms of wealthy countries. Why is that? And why do we have such a difficult time on the left and in all the circles we run in, thinking about this problem of police violence as something more than a problem in urban areas? Now, there's certainly places like Minneapolis and Chicago where Black Lives Matter resonates in a really peculiar and specific way. It resonates because it matches almost completely with the empirical realities in those spaces. In Chicago, in the years before George Floyd, 70%, over 70% of those persons who are murdered by cops were African Americans. Over 70% of those persons who were involved in harassment stops, that means you're detained by police, but you're not necessarily arrested. Over 70% of those were African Americans in a city where blacks only make up about 1/3 of the population. So in that context, Black Lives Matter resonates. It captures a clear empirical reality about the city and the injustice of policing there. When we broaden our focus nationally and look at numbers regarding police violence, blacks are not the majority of people killed by police. That actually the higher levels of police violence and police killings occur in places where there are very few black people. Indigenous people are much more likely in terms of per capita to be killed by police. People with disabilities, much more likely to be killed by police. So we need to factor in these realities. I don't think that means diminishing the anti-racist politics one bit, but I think there's a potential for much broader, much more substantial coalition, in particular kinds of majoritarian coalitions we need to win in places like Minneapolis, in places like Phoenix and Tempe and other places around the country, where we really do need to build these majority coalitions, right? Majority power. And I don't think we can turn away from that. I also say that it's not an exceptional conditions afflicting blacks. I want to be clear about what I mean by that. In 1954, when the Brown decision is rendered by the Supreme Court, over 60% of the black population lived in poverty. There's a universality in terms of condition that most black people experienced. North or south, urban or rural, right? So there's legal and de facto segregation, but there's also high levels of poverty that everybody can identify with. We also need to think about the tremendous progress that's been made since the 1960s and since the Brown decision. The black poverty rate, during the 1970s and 80s was more than cut in half and stands today at around 19%. Still far outpacing all other ethnic and racial groups in the US. So there's injustice there, but it's not the same as it was in the 1950s. We're in a different situation, a new set of conditions, a new set of challenges that we need to reckon with. And I don't think, again, the people who are being over-policed are all black people. One way to think about this, and part of what sparked my decision to talk about it in this way today, were the publicized beating of a white man in Arkansas recently by police officers, and a killing of another man in Harris County, West Virginia, while he was attending his dad's funeral. He's shot and killed by police. Looking at those incidents, they don't really circulate on social media in the same ways. They don't sort of evoke the same outrage, but yet there's a tremendous amount of similarity in the conditions those people experienced in Harris County, West Virginia, in the Arkansas town where this other man was beaten, in Chicago and Minneapolis, Baton Rouge, Los Angeles, and all other places. When we think about the problem of police violence, we're not looking at a style or strategy of policing that's strictly driven by racial animus. That's a part of it, that's a dimension. But the populations that are being most aggressively policed, what they have in common is that they represent the most dispossessed segments of the working class, whether they're in large majority black cities, whether they're in small busted industrial or post-industrial towns. That's who we're looking at. We're looking at people who are criminalized segments of the working class, people who've been pushed to the brink and now have to rely on survival crimes in order to make it. I grew up in Louisiana again in the 1970s, and I didn't know Louisiana was as poor as it was. I didn't know anything else, right? My family was between Mobile, Alabama, where my grandparents lived, and then another wing of our family out in Houston, Texas. and the rest of us were in Acadiana, which is the southern French-speaking region of South Louisiana. I didn't realize it was as poor as it was, right? I didn't realize it until I went elsewhere that I grew up in the poorest jurisdiction of its size in the country. It's no surprise in the 1980s, as the carceral apparatus began to expand, so many of my high school classmates sucked up into it, right? So that when I took those kids to visit those prisons when I was 19, I saw my classmates on the prison yard. We didn't have the term mass incarceration then in 1990, 91, but that's what I was looking at. And I think we have to, again, reframe and think about these problems in a way that might, encompass the entirety of who's being affected, who's being over-policed, and why. And there's a way, I was glad to hear Marcia talk about the middle class, right? The folks who want to kind of retreat and feel safe, right? Feel that this doesn't really affect us, live our lives without necessarily thinking about how we're connected to this, but we all intimately connected to this problem of policing. And it's not just in the sense of, oh, I feel terrible when I see the video of somebody being killed. The very lives that we enjoy, right? The value that's in your home or in your neighborhood is intimately connected to policing apparatuses that help to shore up property values, ensure certain levels of crime do not affect the people in that area. And so even when you're not paying attention to the latest viral video, your lifestyle, right, the stores you patronize, the neighborhood you live in, intimately connected to the carceral apparatus. And we need to be mindful of that. And I think if we're really opposed to policing and police violence, we should definitely sort of take a stand where we are, right, in these places. The last thing I'll say, and maybe this is the real provocation that speaks against this idea of dismantling police departments, is that really the strategy that we need, right? To dismantle and defund and do away with police. I will agree, and I think this is maybe one of the most powerful aspects of this latest wave of Black Lives Matter. It has called attention to the kinds of inequalities in municipal budgets, right? That we can spend exorbitant amounts of money on policing and trucks and military type technologies, at the expense of community centers and programs for young people and jobs and all sorts of other things. So that's been a really important part. I think we can go so much deeper, right? I mean, all cities, spend a tremendous amount of money subsidizing downtown development, condo tower construction, upgrading the tourism zone, right? So that they can bring more in the way of middle-class visitors and consumers into the city. That should also be opposed. That should be drawn into this conversation about policing. And we've seen this in Chicago this last summer in particular, right? The two things have come together. They've collided in a way that, you cannot turn away from it. There's been a problem, there's been recurrent problems in Chicago for ever since I've moved there with so-called black youth wilding, right? Black youth showing up in downtown in the warmer months, either congregating and taking up the sidewalk, getting into conflicts with tourists, or in some cases doing smash and grab robberies in stores, or being in brawls with each other, right? This past summer, we actually had a kid who got killed. A 17-year-old got killed in Millennium Park, which is like the crown jewel in the tourism, industry of Chicago. And there was no cries of let's try to figure out a way to create, opportunities. Let's create spaces where young people can congregate and have things to do. It was all about curfews, regulation, more policing, right? So whatever goodwill they might have been unleashed during the George Floyd period had evaporated by the time we get to this summer. I just moved to the LA area for a year. I'm going to be a visiting professor there. And the big issue there right now, I've seen this like every night that I've been there, the problem of street takeovers, right? Where, young people show up in their Dodge, Challengers and spin around in the middle of the street and engage in all sorts of, celebration and debauchery, right? They're calling for stricter regulation and policing. And so we're at a place where I think the George Floyd protest has provoked the question of, who does the city belong to? In what ways should the city's resources be used? Should they be used progressively to try to address inequality? Should they be used to create spaces for young people to enjoy themselves in the summer months in places like Chicago? Or are we simply, moving quickly towards, more in the way of policing that's not only going uncontested, but that's being actively supported by certain segments of the middle class and other folks who want to see the return of the city that they enjoy. So these are the kinds of questions that we have to continue to wrestle with. I don't think they can be resolved. I don't necessarily have the answers myself, but I'm not sure that abolition of police departments is the way to go either, right? I think we need to abolish the conditions that police exist to manage in our world at this particular moment. And that involves, not only the spread of unionization, but also the expansion of public goods and the reductions of the kind of inequality that so many of us have become accustomed to, okay with, as long as it doesn't show up at our doorstep. So I'll stop there, but thanks a lot for inviting me and giving me a chance to participate.
All right. Woo! I had a lot of thoughts going through my head. I'm in a city where after George Floyd was murdered, our city council literally sat at a park and had a placard on the ground that said, like, defund police. That's city council. They walked that back so fast, it was like they were Michael Jackson moonwalking. But I'm gonna tell you this, on the ballot this past year was a measure to actually not have a police department, but have like an office of safety. It almost passed. I mean, we had 44% of the city of Minneapolis vote for it. And though it did not pass, and matter of fact, we wound up getting a strong mayor measure that has made him now diabolically strong. 44% is nothing to sneeze at. I will say this, in the wake of George Floyd, there are people who have asked across the nation, what has changed? Things haven't changed quick enough. I am privately sort of like that, and then I forget that I too am an older person. I'm 49 years old. It's been 2 years. 2 years. If I had a freshman in 2000, they would still be in school right now. It's been 2 years. It's been 2 years, y'all. 2 years and 3 months and 3 days. That's it. And in that time, that is when we start thinking about, for anyone who has made a call for abolishing police or defunding police, you start thinking about, what are police? What are they good for? Let me tell you about what happened in Minneapolis in the wake of George Floyd. We put an autonomous zone there, right? We put barricades there. And what we decided was we didn't want police coming in. We were going to do it ourselves. Normally, when you see me, I have a body cam on. I was the sheriff in town, right? So if we had to do investigation or apprehension, it was my 48-year-old arthritic self that was doing it. So somebody had to investigate. Somebody had to be the Scooby-Doo crew. Somebody had to pull somebody off somebody else, and it was us. But all the calls outside of the zone, whether it was for defund police, and there were wonderful, wonderful organizations like Minneapolis 150 that were making those calls. But if y'all notice, Justice Resolution 001 was not about defunding police. It was about investment in our community in the wake of the lack of, I mean, we're basically a cottage industry. We're a bedroom community. We didn't have Honeywell anymore. We had a lot of factories leave, which is what led to the endemic poverty of that particular area. What we noticed real quick after that, when everything was pew, pew, right? Police wouldn't show up. What I called it was Operation How You Like Them Apples. Somebody called 37th and Little Crow, formerly Columbus. We don't call it Columbus no more. Somebody just shot in my window, 2 bullet holes. What do you mean you're gonna put me on hold? Can I get your name? Can I get your badge number? Paul Blart, 404. Click. Did they really just do the mall car name? Oh yeah, they were punking us. Everyone in South Minneapolis who had even a whiff of defund police about them started to suffer under this Operation How You Like Them Apples. But you know what happened on the way to them being unmitigated dicks? We have discovered something. This highly funded, over-militarized police department is basically running a protection racket. It is running a protection racket. So when you see young folks wilding out, did you find out that these are people that have already been tagged and bagged by the police that we basically call either CIs or CAs, chaos agents? I know, because they live on my street. How the same 5, 15-year-olds get to come in and out of the revolving door of JDC, have an ankle bracelet on, and go back and steal a car, go back and put a gun to the little white lady head on 42nd and Bloomington Avenue a week and a half ago, and still get to drive that car around. And the police see the car, and everybody got a ring, and everybody reporting it, and everybody putting it everywhere. And the police are like, do, 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 do. Because here's the play. I said I wasn't gonna say it, but I'm gonna say it. Let me tell you what we've observed in those 2 years and 2 months. The play is this. You, middle-class Americans, fund us in the way that we want to be funded, and let us police Black and Indigenous and brown bodies in the way that we are used to doing it with impunity. You better let us police Black bodies, or we will let them be niggas in your direction. That's the play. And they can get people who have already had contact with the judicial system and nudge them. Go ahead and go downtown in front of the Guthrie Theater and shoot off fireworks toward the brand new condos. And though you're on a highly surveilled street, and though you're only going down one street and back, you get to do it for 45 uninterrupted minutes being live streamed by multiple white folks on Facebook, and the police did nothing. Until a week later, your city council member decides to barricade your street for public safety. So they removed our barricades because they said that we were an unlawful den of debauchery and, lawlessness, right? But then they put barricades on the rich white folk stuff in downtown. Then they turned around and did it again at Dinkytown, at my alma mater, University of Minnesota. And I'm just thinking these are all homages to GFS. But again, 2 15-year-olds can put a gun to the head of a woman that just came out of therapy, jump into a well-known, recognizable car with no plates, park it very close to me, and the police just look at it and keep walking. I don't want to devolve into these weird conspiracy theories because it's not a secret. Y'all, they all in on it. Your criminals and your cops are the same motherfucking people. They the same people. They the same people. They the same people. It is a protection racket. I want you, apply it to your own city. How many crimes do they actually clear? What do your cops do? What have they done to earn their money? Now, I'm not not verbally, not publicly, not on record in any way, calling for the abolition of police. I don't have to. We don't have to abolish police. They don't do anything in the city where I live except harass folk. I want you to think about that. They let the 3rd precinct burn, and with it, thousands of rape kits, unprocessed for years. So when people do that, you know, exaggerated stories of, well, what if you needed them to, what are they doing? But again, it's been 2 years and 3 months. The change that we want to see in the ways in which we protect ourselves as community, what that's called the Office of Safety, or y'all could call it criminal apprehension. It doesn't matter what you call it. What you're going to have to determine is what that looks like for your city. What are you going to need it to look like? Because trust and believe, what the police look like in Minneapolis, Minnesota is markedly different than what it would look like in Osseo, where they're playing basketball with children and rescuing cats out of a tree, because they don't have the demographics to harass, to kill with impunity. And you're right about this. Even at the rate in which they kill Black folks in Minneapolis, it has nothing on a Beltrami County in northern Minnesota, where Native Americans are 29% of the population. I think the Attorney General gave me an analogy. He says it's basically 1920s Mississippi for them. Indigenous folks in the state of Minnesota, they suffer. They suffer under this covenant that we have. And I'm going to be real. It's as if whiteness needs the consecration of the ground with Black and Indigenous blood, or Black, brown, and Indigenous blood. It's as if nothing's really real unless we do this ritualistic culling. And then everything is okay. It's meat. It's all right. And then we can go forward. We don't admit it. We do not say it out loud. But I'm telling you right now, August 7th, they killed Muhammad Ali Omar in the square. And the next day, people, they walked over a tacky piece of blood in order to go to what is now a historic landmark, a tourist destination. So you walking over the blood of a Black person to go to a sacred spot where a Black person was murdered by police 2 years prior. And then the week after that, Aaron Rodgers died in that square. And the square was full of visitors. It was full of visitors. We live in a society that will take even something that is put up in resistance of the state and try to commercialize it and erase the history of it so that it can now be a viable development corridor. It is now going to be a cultural corridor with a historic landmark. A year or 2 or 3 from now, you can come to 38th in Chicago and buy a Fisk keychain, right? Because that is what we do in this nation. How we gonna make a buck off this, right? And so we stand at 38th in Chicago in all entities, all amounts of appeals to us to trade our resistance for a grant have been denied. Not by everybody. Oh, it was people quick on that train. But by those of us who are standing in solidarity saying, no, we want actual change and we ain't going nowhere until we get it, we stymie them, we frustrate them, we hold on. It's been 2 years and 3 months. And God willing and a creek don't rise, I ain't going nowhere. I ain't going nowhere. No justice, no streets. I mean that shit. We mean that. So so the question is, how do we affect change in the wake of George Floyd? That wasn't the wake of George Floyd. That was the wake of Rodney King. That was the wake of Emmett Till. I've been Black for 49 years, and God willing, I'm gonna be Black for another 49, and I'm not stopping. Just because 2 years ago we woke up, whoever decided that they would start in that moment, doesn't mean that they are going to sit down. But if they must, if they do, trust and believe there'll be other ones coming behind. And these young folks that are coming behind, they're willing to stand up, not just in support of changing our carceral state or moving toward abolition, but even toward collective actions. They are seeing more than anybody else the connections between what we're doing in labor, what we're doing for education, what we're doing for marginalized people. And I say marginalized because people on the autism spectrum, Elijah McClain, we honor him, and other stolen lives. Y'all, the ways in which we've accepted the consecration of the ground with the blood of folks, and then we subconsciously think that's what keeps us safe. Even though your material everyday life has not changed. It did not change because that person was killed for you, except psychologically. And that is something that should keep you up at night, that you feel safe and comforted by the notion that if you have a fear, you can dial 911. The long arm of the law is an extension of your own perceived power. And when people say we don't want police the way we have police, somehow you feel like somebody's cutting off your power. You gotta admit it. I'm middle class too. I admit it. I'm 5 houses in of 38 in Chicago. I admit it. Why won't they come? And that's what they want you to feel. Do you ask yourself, what do they do? Do you ask yourself, can they put a bullet back in the gun? Can they unassault you? Did they find what you lost, what was taken from you? Or did it just show up somewhere? What do they do? The comfort that they afford you, that if you're not strong enough or brave enough or they're quick enough, here I come to save the day. Somebody's gonna be there to fix it for you. But do they? Do they make it worse? Do they make it worse for some people? And does it matter to you? When we think about all the challenges post George Floyd, when we think about all the challenges post all the rhetoric, some of you right now can remember a time when you were marching in the street, and you'll be able to drink on that for the rest of your life. You'll be able to tell your grandchildren, oh yeah, in 2020 or 2021, I was out there. But there are other fights. And this one that we're fighting right now, for those of us that are still on the front lines, don't think we mad at you because you sitting back in the garrison. I'm a retired United States Marine. We weren't all on the front lines at the same time. Some of them were in the rear. And if you're tired right now, or you're strategizing about a different front that you're gonna be fighting on, don't think we out here at George Floyd Square mad at y'all because you're not taking to the street. Y'all didn't take to the street after Amir Locke died. Some of y'all did it for Dante Wright, but I can do a whole list of names of people whose lives were summarily executed by police with impunity. So why didn't you rise up for them? We don't know what will cause a spark that leads to a conflagration within ourselves to say, I can't take this anymore. And it's not all gonna be for a dead Black man. It's not. Because while we're talking, there are brown kids still in cages. While we're talking, a Black trans woman was probably just unalived. While we're talking, there are so many affronts on who we are as a nation, as a people. You pick your weapon, you pick your fight. Sit back, strategize, and organize. Get ready for the fight that you need to fight. I'll be at 38 in Chicago. That's where I'm gonna be. No justice, no street.
We're going to dwell on that for lunch. I don't think we need to say more right now. Marcia is going to be here to talk to us for the next couple of days, as are Rashad and Cedric. Inside your folders, if you are registered and you're a participant in the conference, you have a paperclip with a lunch voucher for today. We're going to just walk down the hall here to get lunch together, and we will be back here and reconvene at 1:30 for a panel on the labor movement and its renewal, research papers. So be back here at 1:30. Thanks.